Chuck Lazenby, Executive Director from Unity Project. And Chuck, the Food Bank and Unity Project have worked off and on together over the years, which has been really great. But I do remember, because I've been around it for a while and I know I look at, but back in, I think it was 2000 or 2001, I remember a number of students and others coming together, and it was kind of a protest. This was long before Occupy, which is over a decade later, whatever it is. But they were talking about homelessness and other things and trying to draw attention to it. And I know that Unity Project emerged from that movement. And I'm sure a lot of people know that. So could you just describe, because I think you were there, right? So that's right. So maybe you can describe a bit of that to us, because I find it very interesting.
Yeah, so in the summer of 2001, a group of activists, so we actually had called ourselves the Action Family, a group of young folks primarily who kind of got together after the, or kind of maybe just prior to the Quebec City protests in April of that year, to, basically try to address social injustice in our own community. So we took the energy kind of that came from those protests, brought it back to our own community. We did a number of different events and things in the community, but I think the biggest one was that we, occupied a city park to bring attention to homelessness, specifically because the Canada Summer Games were coming here in the summer of 2001. And one of the things that concerned us was that there was this beautification of London, there was this cleanup of London, to present, a city with no problems, really, is kind of what we saw. And we wanted to make sure that people were aware, that we have an issue with poverty and homelessness in our community. And so we took over a city park to create a tent city. And at the time it wasn't like we knew how that would kind of pan out, but certainly within just a couple of days, a lot of individuals experiencing homelessness joined us in the park. And we started to really develop, kind of what our purpose was and what we were doing there and what we wanted from it. I think that a lot of demonstrations of this kind of fashion, you typically think, it's going to end in a couple of days, or you're going to get pulled out of there by police or something like that. And, have to move on to different sorts of actions about the issue. But I think that what really hit home for us is, we all had homes. We could actually leave the protest at the end of the day if we wanted to and head home. And the folks who were experiencing homelessness didn't have that option. And we started hearing a lot about, how the system was, in terms of the shelter system or the supports that were available in London, and people wanted something different. People wanted a change. And so we dug our heels in and, worked towards creating something different.
Yeah, now I was around then and I remember that, and I've been part of protest movements myself, and because I'm pretty old, I've been involved in those in a long time, but I think it's often there's the white heat of the moment that comes and people get involved. And then it kind of fades away as policy or other things don't change. You guys didn't do that. I mean, I think you pulled together, you started the Unity Project, but then pretty soon afterwards, if I remember correctly, the city came forward, realizing that the things that you were saying were valid. It's also true that across the country in municipalities, homelessness was really beginning to emerge as a problem, right? That wasn't being dealt with. But it seems to me that whatever you did back then was highly successful, because you did get the city and others to set up. And then I think you got some funding from and others from the city. Is that kind of how you really got going, was at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we had, the great privilege of a lot of support from the community, right? Who also wanted to see change. There was a lot of things happening at that time. There was some new federal dollars for that were being offered to municipalities to address homelessness. Communities were starting to come up with, community plans and trying to work together and strategize. And I think that had not been absent, but certainly siloed a lot more before that time. And so our timing happened to also be very good, that people were wanting that change or some changes to happen. And so we got a lot of support. And I think that, through that community support, and through our advocacy, we were able to, demonstrate that we should be supported to try this kind of new model, and which was a more participatory style model of a shelter, one that was trying to reduce some of the barriers that people were, finding from accessing other shelters. And it was, 2 years later that we received a city grant to be able to purchase property on Dundas Street. And that's really when I think Unity Project, as we kind of know it a little more today, started to form.
So I know a number of folks on your board, for instance, and they have talked to me repeatedly about how your board really works. It's probably not just the board, I'm sure, but really works on a consensus model. That if if you're moving forward an initiative, but there are some that struggle with that or whatever it is, you're willing to wait that out in order to try to find consensus. Do I have that right?
You do. And we use that at our staff meetings as well. And I think that, what's important to understand about consensus is that you come together with shared values, right? You need folks who have some shared values in order to come together and make decisions under a consensus model. And for us, that does mean that on occasion there are some long debates or, but that's also okay, right? That we engage in that manner. Yep.
I'm interested in that because that's how the food bank board works as well. It's not how often politics and some other things work, but it's wonderful you can do that. But you also say you're a peer supported organization in what you're doing. Can you just go into that a bit?
Yeah, so really, I think that one of the things in the pandemic, which I'm sure we'll touch on later, that's really impacted us is we've lost a lot of the opportunity to be a participatory, peer-supported model. So in our location that we've been in for many, many years prior to the pandemic, it was a community living situation where everybody, and I think in some part due to the very tiny size of the building, there was no choice but to engage, with each other. And that our model really relied on participants, being engaged into the day-to-day operations, having to participate in things like conflict resolution and figuring out, strategizing how to live in the same space. So that is certainly something that's followed along with us ever since Tent City.
Yeah. So let's fast track a couple of decades. That was in 2001. I think you just had your 20th anniversary in the summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I realized that there's a lot going on there that has changed over the course of that 20 years. But now we're into this thing in which it seems to me that homelessness has become a national blight. Like it's not just about, we got some, people on the margins in our community. I think every city across the country is now realizing these things are at a significant scale of what is happening. And then I think when COVID came, and I'm sure you felt this as well, a lot of people began looking at it as though, look, we need to be a community. We need to build back better. All of those languages that were used, but they were looking at the homeless and thought the folks that are homeless need to be a part of whatever this recovery piece is going to be. But at the same time, we go through things like winter as we're going through now. And, there's this concentration on we've got to help emergency situations right now, which is what's happening. The food bank's involved in that. You're involved in that, many others. But we can take our eye off the ball, I wonder, sometimes when we do that. This is the second year now in a row where we're into winter responses to try to help homeless people. And it really becomes a focus. It's very interesting in the media. People want to give and want to help. But really the long game that we need to be looking for and the groups that we need to be helping with that, it seems to me we run the danger of forgetting that. That's really what it's about, that we kind of think, well, once COVID's over, we'll be okay. But it seems to me we're not going to be. It seems to me that the homeless situation will continue on long after this recovery has taken place. And my sense from Unity Project and from what I've known about you, Chuck, because we've talked before, is I really think it is the long game that you're interested in. You'll adapt to the emergency the best way you can. But really, it is the long game and trying to change not only how the community sees homeless individuals, but also how it responds to them. Do I have that right?
Yes and no. I think that Yeah, it's complicated in some ways. And I think that one of the things that we've missed over time is you have to invest significantly in both components.
Yeah.
And there's a really there's an unwillingness to do that because it's very expensive, right? We need to take care of the crisis that is happening now. We
Yeah.
need to make sure that people are well supported, that people are not, staying outside, that people have access to the supports and resources they need to, respond to the crisis that they're experiencing. But we also need such a significant investment in foundational things such as income support. I mean, I think that that is one of the biggest, signs of how people experiencing poverty and homelessness are viewed, given that during the pandemic, ever so quickly, it was decided $2,000 is what people need to meet their basic needs and survive economically in the pandemic. And this is not like a luxury amount. This was not something people were getting to go on vacations and buy cars and things. This was survival. Yeah. And we have never looked at people experiencing poverty and homelessness and said, you need what it takes in order to survive in a basic way from an income perspective. Mm-hmm. And so what does that really say about, how we value those individuals who are experiencing that crisis? Mm-hmm. That's just become very stark. If you're on OW, you're getting, less than $800 a month if you happen to be able to find a place that you can pay for rent that is $400 or less. Yeah. Ludicrous. We can't do that in this housing market, right? Yeah. So that's the problem. If we don't invest in those foundational solutions, we will always be responding to the crisis. And right now at the stage that we're in, things are not good. No. Things are very bad in our community and many municipalities. Pandemic has made that worse. The rental market has made that worse. And so, we need that significant investment in both strategies.
Yeah. It seems to me like things like vacancy rates, high rents, right? I've known a number of families that have had to leave the rental situation because of high rents. I get that. And then there's also social assistance. We keep coming back to that, but it really is fundamental as a policy that these social assistance rates are kept at the level where these, all the different disciplines across where social services are involved have enough resources to be able to make it work. But in a wild housing market like we're in at the moment, right? And all these other things, it seems so many things are popping up that makes it difficult to deal with the homeless situation because we're looking at it exclusively by itself as opposed to linked to all of these other things. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what is, just very clear is that we've experienced a lot of systemic neglect when it comes to, an actual social safety net that people can rely on. And that neglect has, resulted in where we're at now. I mean, every single part of our systems needs to consider poverty and homelessness, as a part of the plans when it comes to whether it's the justice system or the health system, the housing market. I mean, we need to actually strategize on how do we ensure that people who are experiencing poverty and homelessness can access all those different pieces. Yeah. And we have not done that so far.
No, that's right. That's how food banks emerge, right? They're not the answer, but they emerge because we're not coming to an answer. We're not getting there. And people just do what they can. We're talking a bit about context here, but can we talk a bit about the Unity Project? Like how many people do you help? What are your facilities like? What are your goals for those folks as you're ministering to them?
Well, yeah, so there's a lot wrapped up in that right now because are we talking pre-pandemic? Are we talking during the pandemic? Are we talking our future, right? So I think there's a whole bunch of pieces. And what's interesting is, we were displaced from our home and our program during the pandemic, and put into a hotel. So that shifted things a little bit for us. But I think what I can say overall, and regardless of where we are or what our physical location looks like, is we're committed to working with people to see them achieve stability once they leave our doors. Mm. And Really a lot of that has to do with partnering with community agencies, right? So we don't do this work alone. No one does. We do that in partnership with every service that might exist out there, to be able to, anchor those supports into the individuals while they're in our program. So when we do have the opportunity for them to move out into the community, into their own place, that those supports follow them to that place. Mm-hmm.
You also have interesting language around it that I've been through your website and other things, but you talk about like this direct or more rapid path between someone who is homeless and being able to get into a place that's secure with supports. But can you just go over with me about what you mean by that? What is this rapid path that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think rapid is not necessarily, we want it to be rapid, and that's the goal we're working towards, but it's not maybe not the only qualifier for, what we're looking at. But basically we follow best practices of housing first, which, is evidence-based best practice about working with people who, don't have homes, to say, we're not going to expect you to resolve all of your issues before you actually can access housing. That it talks about ensuring that housing is the foundation for people to actually work on, whatever other issues they're struggling with. And that's the goal with folks. It's not about abstinence. It's not about getting, their medications all sorted out first, that we do those pieces along the way. And that people are attached to the supports that they need at the level that they need them in order to obtain and maintain that housing. And it's a really incredible way to do the work. It's changed things a lot in terms of the system for London, because we're all focused on that. And what that kind of system or that foundation allows us to do is, we know that an individual walking through our door, for the most part, we are going to be able to figure out a way to resolve homelessness for that person and to help them get connected in the community, be supported. The thing it doesn't do is prevent people from experiencing homelessness in the first place. And so what we have to contend with is this bottleneck effect, where when you don't change those foundational pieces to ensure that people can avoid homelessness in the first place, there's just so many people coming in our door that it's creating, that backlog. So I think that's why I've really come to see that both those strategies are just so necessary.
And also in the conversations that go on around homelessness, there's the subject of high threshold, low threshold, right? That people talk about that. I think for people that are viewing this, it might be helpful if you could explain that. And then how does Unity Project fit within that? Do you kind of do both? Do you just do one? How does that work?
Yeah, so the term we actually use is acuity, so high acuity or low acuity typically. And basically there's an assessment that is done kind of across the community to help determine like what level of support might an individual need. And then prioritizing the connections to the various services that can, accommodate that level of support. Now for us, we provide service to people throughout the spectrum, people who have very high needs or complex needs, or, need a lot of kind of resources dedicated towards them, and folks who have, who don't need as many resources. So we really do see the spectrum of the experience of homelessness, in our services. But I do think that one of the things that's really important to understand is, as communities, we've been told, like, here's the best practices. You prioritize who gets what, and they get directed to the service that would best suit their needs. And that's really great. We want to continue to do that. But one of the things is that we don't have enough services for all the needs that are out there. And so it's really important, I think, for people to understand that we are doing our jobs better. We are coordinating services between each other. We are prioritizing people based on their needs. But what we're hitting is the fact that we still don't have enough resources to meet those needs for everybody who, calls in.
One of the things I appreciate about Unity Project, because I think, you've been around a fair while, you know your way around as an organization, is quite often people stop at the shelter, the kind of temporary shelter, say, okay, we got to get these people off the streets or whatever it is. So let's find a place for them, even beyond just the winter season. There's people who see homelessness as that. Unity Project, every time I've spoken to you and others, and along with some of your board members, it's all about, no, that's the beginning, right? What we have to do is move as expeditiously as we can with supports to get that person into a housing situation, into a secure situation. It seems to me your eye is always on the ball about that. So when discussions come up and others want to talk about how are we going to get these people and get them into a place, you're usually saying, what kind of place? You know, is it sufficient to give them the needs? I presume you drive a lot of that through your own conversations, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, this speaks to when we look at how the system is failing and neglecting to respond to this issue adequately, is that we need a multitude of housing options available for people, right? And certainly with the level of income that people receive, and even with rent subsidies and topping up people's rent, the choices are few and far between. And I think that people need to feel comfortable where they're moving to. People feel like they're not being forced to move to a space that that they don't want to be. But our options are limited, and that just becomes really difficult, right? But I think, for us, it really is always about shelter is temporary. It's an emergency response. It's not a permanent response. And we don't want to see people stay any longer than they have to. And we would move as fast as we could to work with people to get them housed if that was actually available, and in other years, it's been a lot, I think, easier, because the reality for us is a lot of the people we see, their sole barrier is income.
Yeah, absolutely.
Most of the people in the world that use drugs in what might be considered a problematic way, they're housed. Most of the people in the world who have mental health issues that they're struggling with, they're housed. Those aren't the reasons why people stay homeless or become homeless. It's all the structures around that, all those supports around that. And so I think that is the kind of, commentary around homelessness that we really want people to understand, is like, if we gave people enough to pay the rent and buy their basic needs, we wouldn't need as much infrastructure around social services that we see now.
Yeah. Chuck, you've been on the front lines for a couple of decades, longer than some, and you keep driving towards these solutions. I know that about you, and heard you and talked with you before about it. But it seems to me that you are trusted as an organization. I know the city has trusted you. We do as a food bank. But what is the future then of the Unity Project? It seems to me that you're trying to drive towards something not just for homeless individuals, but also for you as an organization. I think to try to have more amenities or whatever it is, however we term it. How do you see your future? For us as a food bank, for instance, the pandemic has got us to transform how we are operating as a food bank. Now that we always wanted to do that, but we didn't have the resources. Now that we have, because the public and the businesses have been so generous. So now we're able to move in those directions. Can you talk to me a bit about where you think Unity Project's future is and how you want to get there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're right in the middle of a transition time for ourselves. And so don't hold me, anyone, to all the exact things I'm saying right now, because we don't have it all mapped out yet, but we got some good ideas, and so I'll start with, in our last strategic plan, which ended in 2019, we identified we needed a new facility at that time. Our facility was just too small. I mean, it's impressive how many people we were able to accommodate in there and in the manner in which we did for so long. But the pandemic certainly has escalated that need, to actually have a facility that can take us through something like a pandemic, that can actually have adequate enough space for people to be healthy in those kinds of times. But further, we have had, I think, the only great privilege of having to be dislocated and moved to a facility that's not ours and work out of the context of a hotel is we've had some very good lessons around what it looks like to reduce barriers to service by providing things like private rooms, by providing accommodations to people who have pets, to people who are in couples, to be able to strategize around harm reduction strategies with respect to drug use, instead of asking people to leave if they are using drugs. And that is, all about good facility design. And I think for far too long, especially shelter services, have dealt with inadequate facilities. And I'm done with that.
Yeah.
Our future is to actually have a facility that will reduce those barriers to access, that will support people with dignity and respect, and be a reliable space in which, we can actually do this work.
Yeah.
And that is our future for certain.
Yeah. I can see that. And I can see that in the folks that help out at Unity Project. I think that that's great, but I don't think that's just new. I think it's something that you've been looking for a time, and I think it's really important. Can I ask you a couple of personal questions?
Sure can.
One is how are you? No, people ask me that, not in an interview, but as a food bank co-director along with Jane, like how have we survived the pandemic and stuff? And I'm not really fully sure I know how to answer that yet. But what about you? You're the executive director. How has it been for you the last couple of years?
I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that, there is something to be said about that, because in our industry, there's always worry about like burnout or people I'm not burnt out. I'm exhausted. I'm actually, and like many of us, we're just, the pandemic weighs heavy of like, what's next? Is there going to be, a period of time where this seems to kind of relax? But I think that when you're working in the context of homelessness or social injustice, those things are already exhausting issues to contend with in the first place. And they add a pandemic on top of that, displacement, et cetera. It's really hard, I think that thankfully, the moral exhaustion I was experiencing in the first year of the pandemic, the context of being leader of organization and saying, oh, I have staff who are working in this potentially very risky scenario. I hope I've done enough to provide safety protocols and equipment and the tools that they need to do their jobs well and feel safe, and be safe. And same with the participants we serve. So that moral exhaustion has faded, which is nice because that was very, very difficult. But it's just tiring. We're tired, right? And we'll keep doing it, like we'll keep going on, but it's been tough.
I agree. My final question is one I've always kind of wanted to ask you is you began as a protester and you've morphed into a manager, community spokesperson kind of thing. I've gone through a similar thing, like the food bank kind of happened overnight and then it became this other thing, but you have to develop nuances. You have to develop understanding of languages and other persuasions. It's not necessarily an easy thing, but you do morph, you do transform, and you're able to communicate better in different situations. That's what I've learned about myself anyway. But how has that journey been for you? For me, I think I was impatient to begin with. Then I was just so busy organizing that I was moving on. And now I've become kind of impatient again. I've kind of reverted back to this thing. How can we let this happen in a country that's so wealthy? I'm wondering what that journey has been like for you personally, protester to manager. I presume that from what I know of you, you have retained that protest part of you much better than I did for a number of years. But how do you deal with that? And was it an easy transition to be able to speak different kind of languages to different audiences when really what you want to say is, let's just get this done, right?
Yeah, well, I think one of the interesting things about my role and perhaps, being surrounded by and supported by the board that I've had over the years is I've never been censored. I do think about that sometimes because I think about what a privilege to have been able to learn this role, and to have so many good mentors around me who are patient enough through my mistakes, who, staff who, I had to learn how to be a manager with people. I had to learn HR and finance and all those pieces, and just the patience of folks around me to be with me through those lessons and to trust that I would get there. Right. You know, and that's kind of the one thing I really like to try to pass on to staff of the organization, is to say, I've had all these opportunities to make mistakes, learn from them, move forward, develop my skills. And that's really informed who I've become as like a supervisor or manager, is to also, you know, offer that to them. And I think that is really important when you look at your own role as a leader, to say, what privileges have I had along the way? And how can I ensure that I pass those privileges along to people who I'm working with?
That's very eloquent. I agree. I think you've gone from being an activist younger woman, right, to doing something that's very important, and you've migrated into being a seasoned voice in London, and also with managing your team and others. But you never shed that thing of protest in you, that kind of a youth part of you that really got you involved in the first place. That hasn't been tamped down to the degree where you've just become a manager. You and I know this from you. You just are able to continue to drive that forward. And I'm so thankful that the board hasn't censored you in that way, because it is, you know, to see a young person doing that, we all need that. We all got started there. But to see somebody who's been at it for 20 years and is a community leader still able to reduce it to that level so we can talk about what we're doing here, I think it's a wonderful thing, Chuck. And you've been, you're more seasoned, I presume, as I am, as the years go along. But the passion is still there in you. And I just really want to commend you for that, and also for Unity Project, that you can be consensus driven, that you can support you the way that they have, and you're still looking for a vision in the future that Londoners can invest in, that will provide better than what's being provided now. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much. Those are lovely words. I really appreciate that.
They're true. I didn't think of them all in advance, but we really appreciate what Unity Project has done and what you have done. Thanks a lot. We really appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Great.